Chapter 3, Humboldt Park. I made friends very quickly on the north side. We all seemed to have something in common other than being of the same race. I was 8.5 when we moved to the north side. The area we moved to seemed predominantly white, but there were also plenty of Puerto Ricans. We lived in the Humboldt Park area. Humboldt Park was the most beautiful park I had ever seen. There was a beach for swimming, a lake for fishing, and many baseball diamonds. To me, it was like a world within a world. Our home was a second floor, 3-bedroom apartment above a grocery store. There were wooden porches in the back with stairs that led down into a walkway that went into an alley. Next door to us was a 3-story building with a bar on the street level. I was enrolled in Van Humboldt School, which was located about 6 or 7 blocks from where I lived. By now, I had become somewhat proficient in English, but there was still a lot I did not understand. I was still very ignorant in the ways of the American youth. I was going on 9 years old. At Von Humboldt, I was put in the 5th grade with kids my own age. Having spent the last 2 years with kids much smaller than myself, I wasn't prepared for such a drastic change. I went from being the biggest kid in the class to being one of the smallest. I didn't like it at all. On the very first day of school, the school bully confronted me. His name was Ricardo, but everyone called him Ricky. He was a big, ugly, black-skinned Puerto Rican. Ricky wasn't muscular, but he was big. He had a big afro and could easily have been mistaken for an African American until he spoke. Ricky proclaimed himself the toughest guy in school and pointed out a certain girl as his girlfriend. He wanted me to stay away from her. Her response to Ricky's claims was, "I'm not your girlfriend. You better stop saying that." The next person I met was a guy named George. He was short with big feet and curly hair and was an easy person to get along with. George introduced me to his buddies Noel and Julio. Noel looked more like a white boy than he did a Puerto Rican. He had dirty blonde hair, blue eyes, and rosy skin. Then there was Julio. He looked more like a stereotypical Puerto Rican. He was brown skinned with pushed back black hair and a very deep Latin accent. George and Noel were both born and raised in Chicago. Their families had been some of the first Puerto Ricans to inhabit the Humboldt Park area. They told me a lot of the horror stories about white violence toward Puerto Ricans. As new additions to the neighborhood, Julio and I could only take their word for it. The stories the guys told about the white people in the area were never pleasant. George showed me scars he claimed were caused by a group of white boys who jumped him because he was Puerto Rican. They assured me it wasn't as bad as it was once, but warned me to avoid any groups of white boys. I don't know why, but deep down, I didn't believe a word these guys told me. All the white people I had encountered since coming to Chicago were friendly and nice. I told the guys about some white boys I had passed on the way to school. They seemed friendly enough. They kept pointing at the sky with their middle fingers. I thought they were showing me how beautiful it was. They also yelled words that I understood to be friendly gestures. I had never heard these words before. They yelled punk, spit, pussy, son of a bitch, and I think they even offered me a pork chop. Julio, George, and Noel laughed uncontrollably as I told them about these white boys. After the laughter, they explained to me what I was being called and what the middle finger pointed at the sky meant. I felt like an idiot. All day long, I kept thinking about what the white boys were saying to me. Now I was scared. I had never experienced such hatred. I became wary and cautious of any company I kept. One morning, there was a group of about 4 white boys teasing and pushing some Puerto Rican kid I didn't know. Noel, George, and Julio wanted to confront the white boys but hesitated because of the presence of a police officer. The officer was standing near his patrol car, about 4 or 5 feet from the white boys by the edge of the sidewalk. He looked at the boys with his half smile, half smirk on his face, but did nothing. It seemed like he was enjoying what was going on. The Puerto Rican kid, apparently pushed to the limit, suddenly lunged at the white boy nearest him and tackled him to the ground. He then began swinging his fist wildly at the white boy's face. The white boy covered his face with his arms, and his friends backed off, yelling, "Leave him alone, leave him alone." The police officer walked up to the 2 boys and grabbed the Puerto Rican kid by the hair. He lifted the kid up and pulled him toward the patrol car. The officer opened up the back door of the car and tossed the kid in as he kicked him in the rear end. "See how tough you are in jail, you fucking spick," the officer said as he slammed the car door. He then turned around and yelled, "Get in school, all of you." I hurried inside and went to my classroom. About 10 minutes later, Noel, George, and Julio walked into the classroom along with the rest of the class. "I told you, the white boys get away with everything." "I told you, the white boys get away with everything," Noel said as he walked past me towards his desk. "They'll probably put him in juvenile detention," George said. From that point forward, I was always leery of white people. Whether they locked up the kid in juvenile detention or not, I don't know. I never saw him again, not in school, around the neighborhood, or anywhere. Maybe his parents had been scared, right back to Puerto Rico. That episode certainly put the fear of whites in me. I immediately recognized that when a Puerto Rican complained about abuse from a white person, they were classified as weak, cowardly, not able to conform to American ways. However, when a Puerto Rican became the aggressor, he was classified as an animal, not fit to live within American society. At school, I hung out with Puerto Ricans, mainly the guys, and avoided whites. This became easier as time went on. There was a candy store located there that we routinely shoplifted from. The store was called Gloria's. The most popular item in the store came in a little folded brown paper envelope that cost $5, called a nickel bag. I always wondered what kind of candy could be so expensive. Anyway, it was because of the popularity of the nickel bag that we were able to steal candy so easily. The boys and I played around in the corner until it was time to go to school. The best thing that came from hanging out with Julio, George, and Noel was how quickly I learned English. They spoke in a mix of Spanish and English that made it easy for me to follow and understand what they were saying. They took the time to explain what I didn't catch on to. After, they had a good laugh, at my expense, that is. In no time at all, I was using the most popular words in the English language in complete, proper sentences. "Fuck you, you stupid motherfucking asshole," was my first English sentence. On the north side of Von Humboldt School was a chain link fence with a hole in it. We called it the escape hole. Kids our size could jump right through it, but a grown-up, like, say, a truant officer, would have a hard time. By the time they did get through, we would be gone. On the other side of that fence was an alley that led to Westkinsaw Street. When we came out of that alley, there was a game room right across the street. The place was called Carmen's. It was the school hangout. It had 2 pool tables, an air hockey table, a foosball machine, and various kinds of pinball machines. The most popular item there was also the nickel bag. At Gloria's, the bags were sold over the counter, but at Carmen's, they were sold by a couple of teenage guys. One sold them inside, and the other worked outside on the street. Back in school, I was in heaven. Being able to read, write, and understand the English language better made school even more fascinating. I was a model student, always on time, my homework neatly completed, and always attentive and eager to learn. My 3 amigos and I were all pretty good students. We were all on the honor roll, which didn't do anything for the cool dude reputation we so very much wanted to have. To make up for it, we used to cut school once in a while and spend the day running around Humboldt Park and hanging out at Carmen's. On several occasions, Noel took us to his house. We spent the day looking through his father's Playboy magazines. It was the first time I had seen an adult female body in the nude. I was kind of embarrassed at first, but I was also definitely excited. Noel seemed a more bit experienced in sexual matters than the rest of us. He spoke openly and proudly about what he would do to a woman's breast if he got the chance. Noel would show us a centerfold and say something like, "I would eat her for so long, I'd have to go to a dentist for a haircut." After school, we would rush home to watch our favorite cartoon, Speed Racer, get a bite to eat, and then meet at the school playground for a couple of games of baseball. While we were having a good time with our ball game, the neighborhood teenagers would group up by the mobile classrooms. They would play loud music, drink old-style beer and Richard's wine, and, to my surprise, make the contents of the infamous nickel bags into cigarettes. I finally found out what the nickel bag was used for. The best-looking girls always hung out with that group. The girls also drank and smoked expensive cigarettes. They were always tongue-kissing the guys and would let themselves be touched and grabbed in places that I thought were sacred to the opposite sex. They would do these things right out in the open with no shame. My friends and I were so envious. Most of the guys playing baseball with us had their minds made up. They wanted to be part of this cool group when they got older. Noel's older brother was already part of that group. Noel pointed him out as the one with the blue baggy pants and the black all-stars that's grabbing the girl's ass. His name was Oscar. It was obvious that he and Noel were not the offspring of the same father. Oscar looked more like Julio, only his skin was just a little lighter. Noel's brother was known as Chico. His name was spray painted or written in marker all over the place. Wherever his name appeared, so did the letters LD, that stood for Latin Disciples. That was what they called themselves. That afternoon, we finished playing baseball. I bombarded Noel with questions about his brother and the Latin Disciples. Noel told me that people in the group were considered the coolest guys in the neighborhood. They protected and helped each other in times of need. They were all known by nicknames. Everybody who joined them was given one. He also told us about how sometimes he would see the disciples chasing white boys and blacks out of the neighborhood, and sometimes even all the way out of Humboldt Park. I asked him why. Julio answered, "Because we're Ricans, that's why." That summer went by quickly and left a lot of unanswered questions in my mind. We played a lot of baseball, tried to hang out with the Latin Disciples, and talked a lot about girls. My stepbrother Hector would come by once in a while and talk sports with me. Sometimes we played catch together, and once he played fast pitching with us. Fast pitching was what we called a game of baseball played against a wall. The wall acted as the catcher. A box representing the strike zone would be drawn on the wall that had an open space in front of it. An imaginary playing field was created depending on the space available. All pitches that landed inside the box were strikes, and any outside the box were balls. Any number of players could play, but the usual number was 1 to 3 players per team. No base running took place. Boundaries were agreed upon to determine base hits, doubles, triples, and home runs. All balls hit in the air that were caught were ruled using these boundaries. Of course, if they were caught, it was an out. Any ground balls hit past the pitcher were base hits, but if caught beforehand, it was an out. The playing surface didn't matter as long as there was a wall and a space to hit. It was a thrill seeing Hector's fat ass trying to catch a grounder or chase down a pop fly. When he ran, we all made believe there was an earthquake. Hector didn't seem to mind. He laughed along with us. Surprisingly, Hector was a good athlete for a man his size. I was so happy playing baseball and going to school. During the winter, the Latin Disciples were rarely seen hanging out. Most of the time we would run into them hanging out at Carmen's or when they would go by Gloria's to buy a nickel bag. Other than that, it was rare to see them hanging out like they did during the summer. Noel said they had some kind of clubhouse where they congregated to stay out of the cold. Winter was pretty boring except for the snowball fights we used to have at school, a few snowmen we built, and of course Christmas. Mostly I stayed at home watching television because my mom didn't want me to get sick. I got to know my stepfather Pedro about as much as I would ever know him, which wasn't much. He spoke in a loud voice that made it seem like he was always screaming. Because of the illegal lottery business, the police would raid our apartment every so often. As a kid, I wondered why they did that. I really didn't pay much attention to it. I thought they were just making sure that our house was safe. They would buy us anything we wanted and would always supply us with candy money. Toward the end of the summer, my mother became pregnant with their first child by Pedro. The family was so joyous, especially Pedro. In the beginning of June, my mom gave birth to the newest addition of the family, a boy. They named him Pedro Jr. Suddenly, like Emilio before him, Pedro Sr. started to change drastically.